In the next half hour, we'll dig into the latest financial news and market stories. And joining me in the hot seats this evening, David Shapiro from Sasfin and Sasha Narishkin from Vestact. If it was in the hot seat, we'd all be sharing a seat. That would be uncomfortable and wouldn't give you much diversity. Sasha Narishkin, nice to see you once again. David Shapiro, nice to see you. Markets coming under a bit of pressure.
A little bit. In fact, you know, I can't get my head around it because it's quite a good sign. You know, if they're discussing withdrawing all the stimulus measures, you know, that's a positive sign. It means that economies are self-sustaining. But before we get into that, remember what Bernanke said. He won't do that until the unemployment rate in the US goes down to 6.5%, and we're far away. So I think markets have been looking for an excuse to sell off. The gold price plunges, given it to them. I'm standing back, waiting for cheap entry points.
Okay, now where is the point where the entry points are cheap enough to entice Mr. Two Raging Bull Shapiro to get into this market?
I think the resources. I still think that it's going to be a mining year, and I'm not hurt by it. I think that gold has come down. I'm glad gold's come down because it was a risk asset. People bought it because they fear. The fact they're selling it means they don't fear anymore. So let it go. And in fact, I think last year this time we came down as well. But anyway.
Sasha, we've seen the gold price below $1,600 an ounce. The platinum price has come under pressure. Other precious metals and industrial metals have come under pressure this week as well. David calls this the year of the resources sector. But if the risk assets are being priced lower, that surely can't be good news for the resources sector.
Bruce, I remember when I started in this industry, an old timer told me trading gold will make you old. So out of all the commodities...
So you met David Shapiro early on in your career.
I think out of all the commodities, that's the one that I least understand. So let me put it that way. So I think in terms of the quality, you have to be looking right at the top of the pile. And in the South African sense, I often say we're lucky enough for historic reasons to be able to buy BHP Billiton, which I'm sure you're going to get to a little bit later, just in terms of what Marius Kloppers always used to refer to as tier one assets, globally diversified, and the quality and energy mix, more importantly, makes them unique in that space.
Okay, but quality, I mean, let's talk about it right now, because Marius Kloppers is confirming this week that he's stepping down as chief executive of BHP Billiton. The results that came out of BHP Billiton were a little on the disappointing side, so that share price really getting smashed quite hard. Add to that softer commodity prices, and at some point this is worth buying.
I think the point is now, if you looked at those results, they were in line with where the market was expecting them to be. So it wasn't a surprise, nor was his departure a surprise. Remember, he went for he's a corporate man. He wasn't even a miner. You know, he was a corporate person, I think, and he wanted to do big deals. He went for 4 big ones and failed miserably on all of them. Luckily, I think. You saw what happened to Tom Albanese. You know, he was gone.
But let's just explore this for a second. I mean, you talk about it. Luckily, he went for the big potash deal in Canada.
That was probably a good one.
That may have been the good one.
Historically, maybe, because if you watch potash prices and nitrate prices, they actually came tumbling last year. We all went and said, food shortage, go for nitrates. It was an awful year for nitrates.
Okay. So Marius Kloppers went for 4 big deals, and none of them came off. He was lucky relative to Tom Albanese, the guy who stepped down from Rio Tinto, because he had made some very expensive acquisitions. Cynthia Carroll made some very expensive acquisitions. So the companies without some decent deals are actually better off, bizarrely, in this environment in which we find ourselves.
It probably was the quality that they were chasing that meant the deals never happened. Because either the shareholders of the business that was going to be acquired said no, or in the case of potash, I think it was the first deal in Canada that turned down in like 3.5 decades or something. Just tells you how important perhaps potash is. A little factoid, remember that they're building Jansen, which will be the single biggest potash mine in the world by 2015, 2016.
Okay, so Marius Kloppers got lucky. His legacy is fairly squeaky clean from the point of view that he didn't do any dodgy deals by default, and he leaves a very solid business
behind.
Have a look
at the write-offs. I think their write-off was only about $1.5 billion. I think BHP Billiton. Rio's was $14 billion. Anglo's, what was Anglo's on?
About 8 or so.
8 billion, whatever it is. So he's at the bottom of the pile.
Yeah.
So it gives you an idea. I still think I agree with Sash. I think BHP Billiton is still very lucky. You don't need anything more than that, because in one company, you know, we like to diversify. We like to have 5 or 6. Quite honestly, you want exposure, just take Billiton. Okay,
but there you got Andrew McKenzie, the new chief executive. He's got BP history.
Energy guy.
Yeah, he's the energy guy. You like the energy focus of BHP Billiton.
And of course, remember his last beat for BP was in the US, so he's got a very good understanding of the US petrochemicals. But I think more importantly in all of this is going to be how they're going to be able to leverage off those gas assets that they seemingly overpaid. They also took write-downs on those. They might be able to write back at some stage, but those are perhaps key to the future of energy independence in the US, which is a big talking point in Washington, on the ground, almost anywhere in North America.
America's getting tired of fighting wars to secure its oil supply, and so what they're trying to do is be energy independent, which gives them then some kind of security.
In fact, I wish we could get the charts up, if you've got a chance to do it, is to have a look at oil exports from the US versus oil imports.
That's changed
very good
fundamentally,
and you'll see that exports are on the rise, imports are on the fall. They're narrowing their need to rely on Saudi Arabia, other Middle East, and in fact,
the trade deficit too.
And that's massive for the trade deficit. So this is a big point. We're watching closely what's happening in America, and I think the cost of natural gas there, of using that energy, is about a quarter of Japan and maybe a fifth of what's happening in Germany. So it gives them a massive advantage in the manufacturing space.
And suddenly you look at Sasol's deal in the United States, going to Lake Titicaca, Lake Charles,
Louisiana.
I knew to say somewhere famous. It's an expensive, higher risk deal for Sasol to do, but you can't have Sasol as an energy play not doing that deal, surely.
You know, and Sasol's NAV is somewhere in the region of 135 billion rand, and we're talking $21 billion. So this is a game changer. This is either, you don't want to say it's make or break, but I think
it
also
won't break,
if you
but
take
it could make them, but it won't break them.
If you take a couple of steps back and you also have a look at who's leading the company, David Constable, who would be able to embark on such a project globally other than David Constable? And I think you probably have to go very far to find a person to be willing to take that sort of, and it's huge risk. There's a lot of risk associated, and that was probably Sasol sold off quite heavily post the announcement. But subsequent
on the basis that they might have been biting more than they could chew. But I think that give 5 years. We've got to watch America. You've got to look and see what's happening. Caterpillar bringing manufacturing back there. General Electric, Apple, they're all bringing manufacturing. They're reshoring again. And one of the big drivers is this very cheap natural gas, this very cheap energy source.
In fact, you talk about jobs added in the oil and gas sector are at a 25-year high.
Okay.
There's no indigenization there, power shortages, the law courts work. So there's a lot of things going for the States.
Okay, you look at it. You want BHP Billiton in a portfolio, and it's looking attractive, courtesy of a nice sell down over the last couple of days. You add Sasol into a portfolio mix on top of a BHP Billiton. You say you don't need anything else other than BHP Billiton, but Sasol gives you that gearing to energy, doesn't it?
And of course chemicals.
And
remember, once you see in a European context, the European economic growth is said to be stodgy at best. But I think once you see a turnaround, you'll see good.
Well, that's the point. America goes up, China goes up, they lift.
Yeah.
At the moment, I always look at Europe as nothing more than a historical theme park. But it needs to.
500 million people.
Well, I mean, they go to the Colosseum and you go to the Eiffel Tower. They need to. Except they're brilliant companies. There's some really good quality companies that you can invest in there. But I think as a continent or as an economic, it's stodgy. And it needs a lift, which is going to come from China and America.
Fabulous discussion. Let's move on to the Africa theme, because I know, Sasha, you're a big Africa bull, taking a long-term perspective on the African continent. ShopRite, with some fairly underwhelming growth numbers. Headline earnings up 12.5%. Not bad, but not ShopRite-ish. I mean, if there was a descriptor for ShopRite, it would be super growth. That super growth has tailed off quite sharply.
Recently, I could take a couple of steps back and have a look at the shareholder mix for ShopRite. And if you have a look at, say, anyone who owns more than 1%, you're going to struggle to find anyone outside of Whitey, who runs the business, Christoph Wisse, who's the founder, main shareholder, and I think the government Employees Pension Fund. Those are the only 3 South African shareholders in. They're all international shareholders. So if they're willing to pay 25 times, because at an international level, people are paying 35, 40 times. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm just saying to those South Africans who go, it's too expensive, this is who you're competing against globally, people who are willing to pay 25 times earnings.
What do you think the shareholders, the foreign shareholders of companies like Truworths, Clicks, Aspen, all of those, we don't own our stock market anymore.
No.
We own by foreigners.
Yeah.
And Sasha's bringing up a very good point. I'm not sure of the foreign ownership in ShopRite. I would imagine
huge,
45, 50%, somewhere around there. It just falls under the 50 because I've got a list of all those that are over 50. But it's high, and they are dictating the price. You know, we might think it's heavy, but they're taking a long view, and the view they're taking is exactly what we saw in Whitey's results, the African expansion. And they've got a long view.
And just the stats that he's pulled out, he used some Standard Bank research. He was talking about Angola and Nigeria making up 40% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP in the next 10 years. I mean, those are substantial stats. They're difficult countries in which to operate and go and build shops and get your supplies in, and especially in a place like Angola. Of course, we've got the Brazilians and the Portuguese who coming in and going bon dia because they know how to do that. Sorry, on to more serious things. Portugal, Brazil and Angola. Your thoughts?
I think Angola is unique in that they had a really lengthy civil war, so a lot of the population is on the west coast. I think where they're going to struggle is obviously, you know, government basically owns the energy play there. You know, the president's daughter, for better or for worse, is the major shareholder in Sonangol.
So what's new in Africa? Yeah.
What's new? So, I mean, I guess you're going to see a liberalization at some point. But the Chinese have invested enormous money. I mean, I've seen pictures of an entire city south of Luanda that's been built from scratch and you know, sent to me by some Standard Bank guys. And it's absolutely amazing that the swap of commodities for hard assets, I mean, I would rather see that. I don't care what's happening in the background. Because apparently in Africa, it's something like 90% of all transactions are done kind of that way. So we need to get
outside of South Africa.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, Bruce, I don't know. We seem to be moving
You
in
know,
that
it doesn't
direction.
bother me. You know, it comes to the same ways. How do you play emerging markets?
Yeah.
How do you play Africa? Don't worry about that. Let Whitey worry about it. You know, let him put up the Checkers store or the ShopRite store. Let him worry about all those issues, because the money will come. And as we've seen, you know, where South African companies have expanded and maintained their standards, you get the benefits.
Another chief executive quitting today. Fresh news. Great tweet from Sasha this morning. What was it about Grattan?
He was retiring to spend more time with the Starship Enterprise.
Of course, Grattan Kirk, one of the captains. Kirk. David Shapiro's got it now. Grattan Kirk, chief executive of JD Group. He's been running the JD Group business under the executive chairmanship of David Sussman, who's turning 65 this year. You may be interested to know. But David Sussman taking over the reins.
Well, I've known him for about 45 of those 65 years.
You've known him all your life.
I've known him all my life.
But here's David Sussman at the age of 65 taking over the reins again as chief executive. It's a very interesting move.
I like Grattan, and I really like JD because of Grattan, because what he has achieved with incredible connection, and I liked his plan. He was always a pleasure to listen to, straight down the line. I don't know what happened. I'm not quite sure why he's leaving and what's behind it, because he was very excited about the position and the job. A lot was happening, particularly maybe they're under Steinhoff, maybe there's a culture clash. I'm not sure. I can't speculate, but I think they've lost a good man.
But yeah, Grattan Kirk and Ian Kirk both got their jobs at about the same time. Ian Kirk is chief executive of Santam, and Grattan Kirk is chief executive of JD Group. I wrote a cover story for FinWeek, put them back to back on the cover of FinWeek, and at the headline, Captain's Kirk. I think that was the thing that actually caused me to write the piece. At the end of the article, I wrote just a little line, time will tell who's made the better choice. Grattan Kirk cornered me in a steakhouse a while ago to reassure me that his brother's done considerably better than he has under Bishara.
It might be the accents. You know, you've got Marcus Joost on one hand and you've got Grattan on the other hand.
An
Maybe
Irishman.
there's a communication.
The Irish and the Afrikaners have always got on.
How does the joke go?
You can tell us off air. Right, so we've got a changing of the guard at JD Group. We've also got the Amplat situation. That seems to be returning to normal. Anglo Gold Ashanti results. I mean, come on, please. I mean, lovely man, Mark Kirifani. He'll do very, very well at Anglo American. But if you'd invested 10,000 Rand into Anglo Gold Ashanti 10 years ago, you would have made the sum total of about 75 cents on your investment in total. I mean, it's diabolical.
That's before taking inflation into account.
Absolutely.
So you probably would have been halved your money in that
you
time.
look at, just get a clean industry. Go have a look at Discovery's results. You know.
Those came out today as well.
Yeah, 15, 25% up wherever they are. It's a very good result. You've got to try and understand all the different kinds of earnings numbers that they do produce, but nevertheless a very solid, good result. Compare that with a gold mine, where you've got to go 4 kilometers underground, blast rock, cool it down there, pull it up for a thimbleful of gold. You've got to be crazy.
What would it take for you to own a gold company? We haven't owned one in over 10 years. What would it take?
Me? No, I'm not.
Never.
It's just a bad industry.
But what would it take?
What
What would it take for you to own a gold share?
I would look, which I did in my past when Sasha was still very young and hadn't even thought about going to the stock market, when they gave 10 and 12% dividend yields, you know, when you could get the money back.
But even Sibanye Gold, which is being sold as the great dividend yielding promise of the JSE, listed at about $14, went all the way up to $17. It was looking like the miracle share of the JSE last week, and it's all the way back down to below where it listed. I mean, the volatility in these things is made for men much tougher than me.
I think Mark Tufani said yesterday we're watching it with interest. Now, obviously, he's going to be on his way out shortly, but when he means we, I think the whole
industry,
gold mining industry, to be able to see whether or not over time these smaller assets, ironically, would be able to perform better independently of each other. And David will probably recall that, you know, when I was in my nappies.
When mines will run independently, ring fenced, they all have
and that is, it's a test case for an Anglo Gold. It's a test case for Anglo Gold, because it's looking to see whether or not that is an appropriate strategy for it to employ, because, of course, it has a similar structure to what Gold Fields had before the unbundling of those assets.